What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be installing a 16-tooth front sprocket onto my 2018 Duke 390. The reason I'm doing this is because I want slightly longer gears, and what that should do is effectively bring my revs down a little bit when I'm cruising on the highway. I do like 90% of my riding on the highway, typically between 75 and 80 miles per hour. And right now at 80 miles per hour, I'm turning about 8,000 RPM. What I want to do is lower this to around under 7,500 or as close to 7,500 as I can. So doing a 16-tooth front sprocket will lengthen my gears and should effectively bring the revs about 500 to 600 RPM down from cruising speeds is where they are right now. So stock, the bike comes with a 15-tooth in the front. I'm only going up one tooth. This can make your bike feel like it has a little bit less torque than it actually has, because the shorter your gears, the more instantaneous your power really is, but you also have to shift more often, and the shorter your gears, the less your top speed in each gear is, and effectively overall you'll have less top speed as well. The equivalent of doing a 16-tooth in the front would be doing a 43-tooth in the rear. Now the reason I chose to do a 16-tooth in the front versus a 43-tooth in the rear is because I feel that swapping the front sprocket is going to be much easier. In theory, all I should have to do is loosen the rear axle, loosen all of the adjustment out of this, and then I should be able to slide the rear wheel forward enough to give me enough slack on the chain to get the chain off the front sprocket and also back onto this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off this cover. I've already taken off my sprocket cover, or my chain guard here, which I showed in the previous video. Down here is some tools we're going to need. You're going to need a 4mm Allen. That's mostly to come and take your chain guard off with. I chose to use a 4mm Allen adapter in my power drill because it made it a lot faster. You're going to need a 10mm wrench, a 14mm wrench, open-ended. You're going to need an 8mm socket. You're going to need a 6mm or I can't remember the equivalent Allen key. You'll also need a 17mm either box or open-ended wrench, and you will need a 7/8 socket as well. Additionally to this, I would recommend having a torque wrench, which I do have. It's in my toolbox, and I'll bring that out when I need it. But that's going to be for when I'm torquing the rear axle bolt back down. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get the front sprocket cover removed, and once I do that, I'll show you guys the stock gear. So to get your sprocket cover off, all you have to do is remove this Allen head bolt right here, and these three 8mm bolts right here. Now behind the larger one up here at the top, there's going to be a spacer. If it falls out, just make sure you keep track of that. I'm just going to go take this straight off. There's that spacer I was talking about right there, so just don't lose that. I'm going to set all of this down. And right here we have our stock 15-tooth front sprocket. Let me find it. So you can see right here, it says 15Z on it. To get this off, all you have to do is remove these two 8mm bolts right here. It's recommended you slack the chain up at this point, and then we should be able to slide that off. We're going to then take our new one, slide it into the chain, and slide it back in place and bolt it back in. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is loosen my axle bolts in the back and take all the slack, or put all the slack into the chain, and then I'll wiggle that front sprocket out. Okay, so I removed the two 8mm bolts that were up here. If you've already got your bike lifted up in the rear like I do, and this starts to spin on you, just put the bike in gear. Something I want to note about taking this little plate off right here is when it's lined up with the holes for the bolts, you can't pull it off, okay? So all you have to do is turn the plate until the teeth match up like that, and then you'll be able to grab it and pull it straight out, okay? So don't get frustrated with this piece because you're probably trying to pull it straight off without lining those little teeth up first. All right, now back here, I've already loosened up the axle nut. You put a 17mm on this side, a 7/8 on the other, and just loosen it up. You don't have to take the bolt all the way off of the other side. All this does is release the sideways tension off the axle and up against the bearings there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this 14mm jam nut. That way I can turn the 10mm nut, and I want to turn this nut as far back this way as I can, so that way it allows the wheel to move forward. And you're going to need to do this on both sides. All right, so just loosened that jam nut right there. It's going to allow me to spin it forward. Go do the same thing on the other side. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your 10mm, slide it in here, and you're going to rotate this jam nut. Well, not jam nut, but you're going to rotate the adjuster nut to release the slack off this block back here. Take it in as far as you can. So I'm able to spin it by hand now, both pieces there. And then what that's going to allow is once I loosen up the other side, I should be able to hit this and that wheel is going to come forward. Now you can see I have all of this slack in the chain. I might not actually have to do it to the other side at this point. I got a ton of slack here. So let's come to the front. See if we can get this gear off of here real quick. I'm going to use a screwdriver to help pry this out real quick. That way I don't get my hands too dirty. So I'm just prying it forward. Bring it forward as far as I can. Get my screwdriver back in there. It seemed to be doing the trick at first. There we go. She's off of there. Now all I gotta do is grab that. Get that sucker out of there. Alright, she's out. Now this front sprocket only has about 2,700 miles on it. It's still in pretty good shape. I could probably even save this and reuse it in the future if I wanted to. Something I want to note real quick while I'm talking about that is whenever you're doing chains and sprockets, you should always check for wear. Make sure that these sprockets aren't sharp-toothed or worn down, or make sure that they're not super sharp. Like the points on them should have a somewhat flat area on them right there at the top. Right, so you want to make sure these things are in good condition. Now my bike only has 2,700 miles on it, so the chain and the sprockets don't have too much wear on them, which is why I'm not worried about putting just a new front sprocket on it. But normally, if your bike has high mileage and high wear, you definitely are going to want to replace all three of these items, the front sprocket, the chain, and the rear sprocket at the same time. And that's when you'll make your gearing change if you want to change this up. But like I said, I got pretty low mileage, so I went ahead and I did it now. Another quick thing to note is this area in here is probably going to be super dirty, so take this opportunity to clean this little guard up real nice. Clean this area out a little bit too. Alright, so I got the front sprocket in there. Now, I'm going to have to call myself out on this. It wasn't as easy as I thought. So, out here in the back, just releasing the adjustment nut all the way down was not enough to give me enough slack to get the sprocket on. Like, it was just like 2 millimeters away from getting on there, but it would not go. There just wasn't enough slack. So you will have to take out the axle nut on the other side and just pull the axle out a little bit, at least enough that this adjustment block can come out of the way so that the wheel can come a little bit forward, and the end hit point, instead of being this block, will be the axle up against the end of the swing arm right there. That'll give you plenty of clearance to get this thing in here much easier. So at this point, what we're going to do, I'm going to get this plate back on here. We're going to find the holes that it lines up with. Just twist it around until you get 2 matching holes, which looks like, which 2 are we going to use? Not you. Not you. Don't look like any of these line up. So let me take this thing out, flip it around. I could have it on there backwards. Yeah, actually I think I do. So if I look at it, I can actually see the face of where those nuts were. Put that back on. 2 of these are going to line up. There they are, right there. So I just had that thing on backwards a little bit. So I'm going to get those bolts back in there. The bolts that hold this thing on, you can use a little bit of blue Loctite on the end of there. I'm probably going to use a little bit. But these only need to go in there like hand tight plus a little bit. Like a little snug is all you need. I don't know the torque spec off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's very, very small. Probably like maybe 8 foot-pounds, if that. So don't go crazy on those front bolts or else you'll snap them off. All right, so let me get that done and then I'll be back. It only takes a little bit. Do not go crazy with the Loctite, guys. All right, so I've got the 8mm bolts snugged up. Those are good to go. I've got the rear axle back in place with the adjusters on both sides back in their place. I have not tightened the axle bolt down because we need to do a chain adjustment. So you can see all this slack. We need to take care of that. So I showed this in my last video, but if you look on the side of your chain guard, it shows you that there needs to be 5 to 7mm gap between the top of the chain link and that point on your swing arm. The point it's talking about is this cross intersection right here. So when you come down here and you push up with your finger, there should be roughly, get this out of the way, there should be roughly a 5 to 7mm gap between this area and the swing arm. So it's a little too slack, so we're going to put a little bit of adjustment into this. So to do that, I also have my new handy dandy Motion Pro alignment tool that's going to make sure our chain's nice and lined up. So let me get to that and I'll report back when I have this all snugged up. Alright guys, so I got everything buttoned up. Got my chain adjustment made up. Got the rear axle torqued back down. The spec on that is 72 foot-pounds. So make sure you torque your rear axle nut back down to 72 foot-pounds. It didn't take much adjustment off that thing to get it back into spec, but I've got my chain slack pretty much right where about I'm comfortable with it. And the Motion Pro let me know that everything was nice and center still. It still holds true that these things are pretty accurate. This time I went off the bottom here, and you can see that on the adjustment block, it's just barely meeting the edge of that bottom notch right there. So it came out perfect. Everything is spinning smooth. And unfortunately, I can't take it out for a ride because it's going to rain today. So leave me a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe as always if you would. I got more content on the way, all right? I'll see you guys in the next one.